Today, I want to share the story of how one girl miraculously survived that night when she was pulled out of her cabin on impact and landed on the other ship's bow. Yes, you heard that right. She went to bed on the Andrea Doria and woke up in the twisted wreckage of another ship. Crazy, right? The fact that she lived through such an ordeal is mind-blowing by itself, but as I dug deeper into the events that followed her rescue, it turns out that her rescuer's story has a plot twist of its own. The Andrea Doria's fame endures among ship geeks like myself for several unique reasons. For one, it was the first major shipwreck documented on television for millions to see, and watching this beautiful ship disappear beneath the waves truly symbolized the end of the golden age of shipping. For many, the Andrea Doria sinking was not just the death of a ship, but the death of an era. Secondly, it was one of the first ships to have radar technology, the very technology used to prevent this kind of disaster. But of course, technology is only as good as the people who use it, and obviously mistakes were made that night. And finally, it remains one of the most elusive and deadly wrecks to dive. As of this video, some 16 divers have been killed attempting to explore the wreck, which has earned it the nickname the Mount Everest of diving. On the bright side, it's not famous for having a catastrophic loss of life, as I mentioned earlier. Out of its 1,700 passengers and crew, 46 people were killed, with most of those fatalities occurring at the initial impact. The ship then took 11 hours to sink, which gave plenty of time for surrounding ships to come rescue the other passengers. But in the case of 14-year-old Linda Morgan, her rescue ship literally scooped her out of her cabin on the Andrea Doria. Her survival is so miraculous, in fact, that she was indeed dubbed the Miracle Girl by the media at the time. It's an incredible story, and it's one that I think deserves to be shared so we get a better sense of just how terrifying it was for those passengers who were in their cabins at the point of impact. The fateful voyage for Linda Morgan and her family began July 17, 1956, when Linda, her 8-year-old half-sister Joan, mother Jane, and stepfather Camille Chanfara boarded the Andrea Doria in Gibraltar. Mr. Chanfara had previously attempted to book passage on Andrea Doria's sister ship, the Cristoforo Colombo, but unfortunately, he was unable to secure tickets. The family had been living in Spain as part of her parents' work assignments since both Jane and Camille were news correspondents for the New York Post and the New York Times respectively, and they were finally on their way back to the States for a vacation. After they boarded, the ship set off on a 9-day trip to New York, and for several days, the family got to enjoy the comforts of first class, and Mr. Chanfara even won $95 at bingo. It was on July 25th when the family's night of terror began. At lunch that day, the fog was beginning to worsen. The captain was nowhere to be found, and Linda's mother noted that this was actually a good sign. Now we're all safe, she told Linda. The fog grew denser as evening progressed, and at dinner, Linda's father, a writer for the New York Times, joked he would have to write a story if the ship crashed. Just a few hours later, he would be dead. That night, Linda and her sister went to bed around 10:30 in cabin 52 on the upper deck. Linda wore yellow pajamas patterned with Chinese symbols, while Joan wore white. Their parents tucked them in, and when they left, the girls stayed up a few more minutes laughing and joking. About 40 minutes later, the MS Stockholm, a 525-foot-long Swedish passenger ship, penetrated some 40 feet into the side of the Andrea Doria. The two cabins, shared by Linda and her family on the starboard side, took a direct hit from the bow of the Stockholm. When the ship pierced through the side of the Andrea Doria, Linda was scooped out of her cabin in the dead of night and landed amidst the twisted metal as the Stockholm retracted from the ship. Her 8-year-old sister, unfortunately, who had been sleeping next to her, was ripped from the Andrea Doria and dragged into the sea. Her body was never found. Linda's mother and stepfather in the adjoining cabin were thrown through the wall into cabin 56, where Thor and Martha Peterson were sleeping. Jane became pinned between a bulkhead and her bed spring. She was alive but badly cut with a broken leg. Nearby was Mrs. Peterson, who had gotten pinned between the bulkhead and an elevator shaft. She had been mortally injured with a broken spine and 2 broken legs. Her husband Thor, a chiropractor from New York, began injecting the 2 injured women with morphine and did as much as he could to help them. When his wife died, he cut Jane free and began carrying her to the boat deck. She screamed to go back for her children, only to find a gaping hole where their cabin had been. Both of her girls were gone. Jane's husband, Camille, who had suffered major head trauma, died on the floor of cabin 56 with Mrs. Peterson. Both of their bodies would go down with the ship. Meanwhile, on board the Stockholm, Linda was lying among the wreckage, surrounded by remnants of her stateroom, including a red autograph book that had been sitting on her bedside table. Amazingly, aside from a broken left arm and bloodied legs, Linda was fine but unconscious. When she woke up, she began calling for her mother in Spanish. At the same time, 36-year-old Spanish crewman Bernabe Polanco Garcia was walking along the deck. He had been feeling seasick and went out for some fresh air right before the impact. It was a fortuitous time to feel nauseous too, because his own room on the Stockholm was destroyed and several crewmen in their quarters had been killed. Crawling along the wreckage, he managed to find Linda and asked her how she got there. She responded, "I was on the Andrea Doria. Where am I now?" On July 26th at 10:09 a.m., the Andrea Doria finally capsized and slipped beneath the waves. The damaged Stockholm managed to dock in New York with more than 500 Andrea Doria passengers, including Linda. In New York, Linda's father, famed journalist Edward P. Morgan, had reported on the incident the previous night, having already been told that his daughter was missing and presumed dead. The New York Times even ran a story claiming Linda was already dead. It wasn't until the next day that Morgan discovered Linda was in fact still alive. Later, he gave an emotional account of what it was like trying to report the news while separating himself from the personal tragedy he had been processing. In the interview, he said, "Within the space of 24 hours, this reporter has been pushed down the elevator shaft to the sub-basement of despair and raised again to the heights of incredible joy." While in the hospital, Linda's rescuer, Mr. Garcia from the Stockholm, came to see her and received a warm welcome from both the hospital staff and Linda's father. Since Linda had been born in Mexico, she and Garcia both spoke to each other in Spanish during their visit, with Garcia at one point telling her, "Mi casa es tu casa," or "My home is your home." Before leaving, he even signed Linda's little red autograph book, the very one that had been sitting next to Linda on the Andrea Doria. The happy meeting was reported on by the New York Times, but apparently, the captain of the Stockholm didn't care much for the media attention Mr. Garcia was getting for his heroism. So, instead of being celebrated among the Stockholm crew, Captain Gunnar Nordenson made him the target of several biting remarks during a meeting later that week, calling him out by name in front of the other members of the crew. So, what should have been a time to celebrate soon turned mysterious when Mr. Garcia went missing just days later. On August 5th, 10 days after the sinking, Mr. Garcia, along with 68 other members of the Stockholm crew, were scheduled to fly back to Sweden that evening. He was seen riding the bus to New York International Airport, but he never boarded the plane despite being paged multiple times. Before his disappearance, others had noted how Mr. Garcia had expressed hurt and disappointment from the comments made by Captain Nordenson. As it turns out, he fled to Canada because he didn't want to go back to working for the Stockholm's captain. In 1963, after getting married and fathering an 8-month-old baby, he was arrested and accused of terroristic acts associated with the Quebec Liberation Front, a separatist group that committed numerous violent acts in the 1960s and early 70s. Despite his deportation being ordered later that year, he was granted an appeal and cleared of all charges. In February of 1964, he was allowed to stay in Canada, and according to one website, he moved back to Spain in the 80s and died in 2004. His life after Canada is hard to track down though, and I really couldn't find any authoritative source to verify his whereabouts. After the sinking, Linda's mother filed a $3.1 million lawsuit against the Italian and Swedish lines that owned the Andrea Doria and the Stockholm, claiming the accident was caused by carelessness and that the radar equipment was inadequate for its purpose. Again, I was unable to find the result of this lawsuit or what she was rewarded, but presumably and hopefully she got a fair amount considering she lost both her husband and daughter. Over the years, Linda never really liked talking about the sinking, and for understandable reasons. Her family was torn apart quite literally that night, and for years, she suffered survivor's guilt. In 1981, she was interviewed by the New York Times when a 3-ton safe was recovered from the ship and was rumored to hold rare jewels and coins. A TV documentary was planned to show the opening of the safe, and Linda wasn't too excited by the idea. She said, "Very personally, I find the whole exploration rather distasteful. I can understand their feeling, but I sort of wish they'd leave it alone. I'm not really planning to watch, but I'd like to think it'll be full of fish." As it turns out, she kind of got her wish. The $2 million mission to retrieve the safe revealed nothing more than a bunch of soggy traveler's checks and currency. In a rare interview in 1997, she discussed the accident itself and the impact it had on her, saying, "The accident made me more cautious in the physical things, but less afraid of growing old and more adventurous in the mental things. Life is precious. There's a very thin line between when you're living and when you're not." Today, Linda Morgan, who is now Linda Harburger, lives in San Antonio with her husband of more than 50 years and serves as the director for a theater arts fund. Her husband became mayor of San Antonio in 2005. And while she may not love the attention her status as Andrea Doria's miracle girl has brought her, there's no denying that her story has inspired a profound respect for the survivors of the lost ship. For more information about the Andrea Doria and Linda story, check out the links to my sources in the description box. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider showing your support by liking and subscribing to this channel. I make videos on anything and everything related to ships and maritime history. Thank you for watching.